My name, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Lauren Patterson. I am the current president of the New Mexico Cattle Growers Association, and I would like to welcome everybody to our stakeholder educational seminar held in partnership with the Commissioner of Public Lands, Stephanie Garcia Richards, and the Office of the State Land Office, and Kim. We welcome everybody here. We have great participation, looks like, by the numbers. But in order for this meeting to be run efficiently, I have some quick housekeeping things I'd like to go over. One, during the presentation, please keep your videos off and your sound off. This will help not have feedback through the person speaking. During the question and answer segment, please raise your hand. And when called upon, please unmute. To unmute the computer, the unmute button is at the bottom of the screen. To unmute from a phone, please dial *6. Please state your name, where you're from, and ask your question. You can also utilize the online chat feature in case you're having sketchy service. That will be continually monitored by our staff. Also, when you're not talking, please remain on mute. Obviously, background noise is always an issue. If you're talking and are not being answered or being recognized, please text or call Michelle or Taylor at our cattle growers office. Those numbers are 505-250-1165 or 505-803-0807, and they were just entered into the chat section of the program. So at this time, I would like to introduce Lisa Hen, the Associate Counsel with the New Mexico State Land Office. Thank you and welcome.
Hi, thank you very much for organizing this Zoom, and we wanted to also thank Senator Woods for being the catalyst for this. I think a lot of us wish we had thought to organize this sooner. We talked today about what order to speak and decided the land office would go first, only because the letter that we sent out was what precipitated a lot of the questions and confusion about the listing and the implications. And so before I go on, though, I'd like to introduce some of the other land office staff who are here and might be able to answer some questions if I can't. We have, I think we have Dana Vackerstrang on. I'm not certain, but she is our Assistant Commissioner for Surface Resources, which also handles agricultural leasing. We have Greg Bloom, who is an Assistant Commissioner for our Oil, Gas, and Minerals Division. We've got April Elliott, who's the Director of our Surface Resources. We've got, I hope I don't miss anybody, but I saw Mark Naranjo's on the Zoom, Brandon Smith, Eric Nelson, Kelly Fox. These folks are in our district offices, and so they might be people you know and that you've interacted with. But I'm going to keep my comments short, partly because of the state land office's role in the candidate conservation with the agreement with assurances. The state land office is a participant in this agreement. We do not administer it. And so we sit on similar footing to other participants like agriculture and ranching folks and oil and gas companies. And as part of our agreement to participate in the candidate conservation agreement, we have committed to notify our lessees about the species and to encourage them to participate in the CCAA. And so that was why we sent the letter. We wanted people to know about the listing and also the potential.
Got them going, huh?
Yeah.
There we go. And so one of the first questions we got about the letter was whether we are requiring anybody to enroll in the CCAA, and we are not. We are encouraging people to, but we are not requiring anybody to do anything. That is really a business decision you'll need to make, but we wanted to make sure that you knew that the option to enroll would be closing soon, and who you need to talk to about whether you would like to enroll. One of the other reasons we felt it was really important to let folks know now before before enrollment closed was that there was an amendment to the CCAA in 2019 that made it a lot easier for certain types of participants to enroll, and that's primarily the midstream oil and gas companies and other types of companies that do linear development. There wasn't a lot of participation from those folks, and so they made some changes to make that easier. So essentially, we really just wanted everybody to know about the opportunity to participate, to encourage you to consider participating, and refer you to CEHMM and the service, because they are the folks who administer it. And so we can answer some questions, but what we didn't want to do was maybe we don't have a perfect understanding of all the details and give you the wrong information. So we are sending a lot of questions over to CEHMM and to the service as well. A few questions that I know have come in have been whether the state land office's certificate of inclusion in the CCAA covers its lessees, and it does not. Each participant, each landowner or lessee has to have their own enrollment in the candidate conservation agreement, so we cannot cover you. Another question we got was confusion about why certain folks got a letter if they were not really very near where the prairie chickens are currently found. We wanted to be a little we wanted to make sure we didn't leave anybody out. So it's possible we got people who are outside of the area. The other reason is that in the amendment, the population area map was updated, and there were some changes made to that. So you might now fall into an area that's kind of a concern or within a certain buffer that didn't used to be. And the whole area of enrollment, potential enrollment in the CCAA was really broadened by a lot. And so some people who might not have wanted to participate in the past or felt a need to participate in the past might want to reconsider and just look at it again and talk to CEHMM and the service about whether it would be advantageous to them. And at this point, I think I'd like to just stop and see if there are any questions. I see some chats. I'm just going to look in there and see if there's anything. There's some contact information that for the land office, Dana and my contact information is in chat, as well as it looks like some folks from cattle growers and for CEHMM. So we've got contact information. And before I hand it back, I just if there are any questions, I'm happy to relate it to the state land office. I'm happy to take those now.
So let's have our question and answer session at the end. But at this time, why don't we let Emily Worth with Kim have her introduction and presentation.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emily Worth. I'm the Executive Director at CEHMM. For those of you not familiar with us, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization based out of Carlsbad. As Lisa had mentioned, we administer the chicken and lizard candidate conservation agreements. These are voluntary agreements in which landowners and industry can enroll. They agree to implement conservation for the species, and in return, they are provided protections from take and basically assurances or some degree of certainty that If a species is listed, which we're looking at, with the chicken, we're gonna have a listing coming up, effective on the 24th. No additional restrictions will be placed on their activities, as long as they're enrolled and they're following the conservation set out in the agreement. So we liken it to an insurance policy. And our goal through the program is to really keep your activities, your work going on the landscape, unaffected by a listing decision. There are mechanisms for enrollment called the CI and CP. I'm sure you've heard that terminology. The CI is a certificate of inclusion. It covers non-federal acreage, and the CP is a certificate of participation. It covers all of your federal acreage. So the agreements operate across the board in terms of surface ownership. It's a landscape scale, so no matter where you're at, you're doing the same thing across the board. And as Lisa mentioned, the deadline to enroll is the 23rd of this month, so January 23rd. We would need to have folks sign the CIs and the CPs by that deadline in order to become enrolled. An important thing I would like to note is that our agreements not only cover the chicken, but they also cover the dune sagebrush lizard. And because the habitat of the lizard falls within that of the prairie chicken, enrollment for any habitat or any area within the lizard habitat area also closes on January 23rd. And we can get into that a little bit more with Matt here. He's going to pull up some maps and show you the habitat areas in the different zones. But in a nutshell, again, industry and landowners agree to enroll. They are voluntary, so you can opt out at any time. Industry pays into the program, landowners do not. And the money that we get through the program is then turned around and we can put that back out on the landscape for conservation of the species. So in a nutshell, those are the programs. I'm going to hand it off to Matt here, and he's going to go into some more of the details. So Matt, I'll hand it over.
Let me share my screen here. Hi, everybody. As Emily mentioned, I'm Matt Mathis. I'm the operations manager here at CEHMM. We'll go ahead and get into, I'll show some habitat here. And I want to emphasize kind of what Emily talked about. The benefit to you enrolling into the program is the ability to have coverage on your activities on the landscape. You do not have to consult with Fish and Wildlife Service. If within those activities, you would deal directly with CEHMM. That would take the place of the consultation with Fish and Wildlife Service. You guys will be working with us directly and not Fish and Wildlife Service within the program. Turn this off. So everything that you see within this purple outline here is the historic Western Prairie chicken range. So that's the way it was originally, and the coverage with covers that entire. And then I'll turn this area here. So everything that's showing is the habitat area that we have program. Got it. So these shaded areas are the blue is the estimated occupied range plus a 10-mile buffer. And then the orange here is our core management area. It trickles down into our sparse and scattered areas here, and then our isolated population area and HAs down in the southern extent of the range. So it's our recommendation, if you're for sure within one of those polygon areas, that you look closely at enrolling into the program. Like I said, the stuff that's outside of these polygons, it's really up to you and your determination on whether or not you enroll. It's our inclination that you go ahead and enroll, especially if you're in near proximity to these habitat areas. The goal of the program and goal of the listing now is to increase habitat, improve habitat. So hopefully we can expand the range with the species. I do want to emphasize too on the differences between the CI and the CP. So the certificate of inclusion falls under the CCAA, the Canada Conservation Agreement with Assurances. So that covers your non-federal lands. The certificate of participation is the CP, which falls under the CCAA or CCA, I'm sorry, Canada Conservation Agreement, and that covers your federal lands. So just want to point that out again to everybody, kind of what those two differences are. We treat it the same. The reason we built the program that way for federal and non-federal is to allow us to treat the landscape as a landscape and not, is that a state section? Is that a BLM section? Especially a lot of our ranches down in the south, in Eddy and Lee counties, and even in Chavez County, they've got a lot of mixed estates, a lot of BLM, state and private lands on a ranch. So in order for us to have the ability to enroll an entire ranch and let that ranch operate as a ranch and not a state section, BLM section, was the reason we did it that way with the landscape approach for the species. I don't have any. Do you have anything else you want to add to that? That's kind of just a broad overview of everything. I think at this point, if we've got questions.
Okay. Well, we appreciate that information. I'm going to have one question right away and I'll start it. So I have a ranch in Debaca County that I lease. But so is that an industry or do I need to work with the landowner and do specifically a CI or a CP?
What type of action are you leasing that ranch for?
Agriculture pursuits. It's grazing.
Oh, grazing. Yeah. So we have the two agreements. One covers industry. So it's directly tied to oil and gas activity, to drilling wells, putting in pipelines, that type of industry. And then the other agreement is for grazing alone.
Okay.
So it's enrolling surface versus enrolling mineral.
In that same property, it's all private or state. So is that strictly a CI?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Just be a CI. The only time you'd have a CP is you'd add any federal acres tied to that acreage.
Very good. So let me look for questions. So please, if you have questions, raise your hand. Michelle, will you call on them? Anybody? Tiffany?
Hey, Lauren. Hey, Emily and Matt. Good to see you guys again. I just wanted to know if, or based on the conversation that we had yesterday, if maybe you guys can talk about some of the practices that are included so that the producers on the line kind of know what's included when they enroll in the CCAA or the CCA.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a set of conservation measures that fall into the CI and the CP. They're written identical, written the same way. We adopted that from the BLM, they wrote a resource management plan amendment, RMPA. They released that in 2008. The measures that were incorporated into that plan, we grabbed those and adopted those into our plan. So if you have a BLM lease, if you're already working with BLM on your grazing, then those requirements and those measures are going to be the same across your ranch. It's treated the same way. If you don't have BLM, then it'll be new measures that are required of you. One of the biggest ones is the grazing aspect. The lesser prairie chicken is a ground nesting species, so they need tall bunch grasses to nest in, to not only shade the eggs from the sun, but also to shade the hens from the sun and from predators as well. So The requirement there is leaving half of your annual growth. So utilization of 50% of your annual growth is what is required within the program. That's throughout the ranch. When we'll go out, we'll set up grazing exclosures in the outside of growing season or prior to growing season starting. We'll go over zero clip that cage. At the end of the growing season, we'll go back in, clip and weigh what was in the cage, and then we'll compare that to what's outside of that cage in each pasture, and then put the numbers together.
And we do, just so everyone's aware, we do call well in advance prior to coming out. And it's maybe once or twice a year, if that. In some cases, our veg monitoring is every 3 years. So we don't just show up.
Yeah, and part of the other, one of the other conservation measures is allowing my team and our biologists access to your private lands and your state lands as well, access to the entire ranch. Again, as Emily stated, we will not just show up unannounced. We'll call days prior to showing up, letting you know, letting know what you're doing. We're either doing surveys for either species, whether it's chicken and or lizard, doing our grazing monitoring, whatever it may be. We'll notify you that we're coming out, what we're doing, where we're going to be. So we'll never be on your ranch unannounced. But again, we'll be conducting surveys for the species and doing our grazing monitoring within the ranch.
And I believe, Lauren, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we sent some template CIs and CPs to cattle growers. So if you have not seen those, feel free to reach out to us and we can get those to you.
Yes, you did. We do have examples of those applications. So Pat Woods, I see you have your hands raised.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. The question I have is, and I should have looked at your templates before I even bothered to ask this question, but you say 50% annual growth, and you're going to set up some fenced in areas so that you can figure out what that growth is. How often? Well, first, I guess you have to have the legal description of the lands that the ranch covers to start with.
Yeah. So what we would do, if you do sign up and you do enroll, we'll get that certificate, whether it's the CP or the CI from you. We'll contact you. We'll build a map. We have teams on our staff that work in GIS to help build that map or the ranch boundary for you. Send that back to you. Make sure it looks right. Make sure everything looks correct, and we've got everything drawn in accurately. And then we can move forward from there. We need the pasture sizes, the interior fences, so we can identify where we're going to put those exclosures out. So work with you, notify you what we're going to do, and then move forward once we implement them. And we have everybody on a 3-year rotation within our, how to do it any sooner than that. But we try to get everybody every 3 years is our plan, is our goal.
And could you give me kind of a cost for this service?
No cost.
So there is no cost. The cost per se by the ranchers is just access to your land, which allows us to implement the conservation, do the monitoring and the surveys that we are required to do through the agreements. So industry, the oil and gas industry pays into the program. That's where our funds come from. But for landowners, it is free, it's voluntary. If we come in and we do some mesquite treatments, or if we install some waters, whatever it may be, and then if that person then decides to opt out of the program, again, there's no cost associated with that. You do not have to pay the program back for any of those infrastructure upgrades or any of the work that we've done. It is entirely free. Again, the goal is to keep you all working and simultaneously implement conservation.
Thank you very much.
One thing I did want to mention, I saw it come up in the chat. Our program is specific to New Mexico. Yes, the chicken does go into other states, including Texas, but our program is specific to New Mexico. There are other programs out there, but ours is, again, it covers the chicken and the lizard, and it covers all surface ownership types.
Thank you. Lee, I see you have your hand raised.
Lauren and Matt, this is Bill Humphreys, and Lee is the host for this meeting. There's several of us in one location in Tucumcari. Matt, can you put your map back on the screen?
I sure can. Hold on. You want to zoom into Tucumcari?
Yeah, okay. Well, can you make it, there you go. So can you follow that purple line farther north that is, yes, from there north? Okay, that's very helpful. Can you take it all the way to the Colorado line?
Sure can. You want me to zoom out a little bit or stay in that
Yeah,
zone?
if you do, that's perfect. Okay, so we have a pretty good understanding that there at about Clayton is the dotted line that Fish and Wildlife had. Everything north is in the threatened and everything south is in the endangered. So if somebody from, you see that little town called Hayden? Can
Right
you
here.
see it? Yes. So if somebody in Union or Quay or Harding County that's inside the purple line, mostly private, but some state, if they contacted you and said, we want to sign, what would your answer be? Because they're kind of out of your colored areas. They're inside the historic habitat, inside the purple line, and outside of the color shading.
Right, that's the area that is definitely gray for us. I kind of touched on it earlier when I was speaking, that it's, I don't know if we have any chickens up there. We as Kim have not conducted any surveys that far north. So I'm unsure if the listing would affect your activities that far north. I don't know, if Chuck's on, Chuck, could you chime in on that if you got a stronger answer or a differing answer?
I can try a little bit. You know, let me just say that certainly in looking at the area of the range for the species status assessment that we did, you know, we considered many more acres than those that are just occupied right now, including things like this. So, you know, right now there's what we expect in areas like this is there would be limited to no effect, essentially regulatory effect for actions that are considered big. So I really don't expect that there would be, you know, much that would ever come up that someone would need coverage for. Having said that, through this agreement, if, you know, a chicken does go out and wander, or if at some time in the future we are successful in recovery and they expand their range, then the coverage is there through enrollment of the agreement. But it's really up to the person. Right now, there's probably no effects or nothing that would be that we look at in any way in terms of having effects to the chicken in an area like that. But it's up to the individual landowner and how they feel about that in the future.
Thanks, Chuck. And for those of you that don't know, Chuck Hayes works for Fish and Wildlife Service. So that's why I asked him to kind of speak on that and clarify it a little bit for you.
And again, I just want to reiterate too, that for a landowner to enroll, again, it does not cost anything. And it is voluntary as well. So if somebody enrolls and they don't like it, you know, they can always opt out. Again, the deadline to enroll is January 23rd. And we cannot enroll folks after that. So if there's any question, my recommendation would be to enroll, and then you can always opt out later on if you so decided to. But there's no way after the 23rd that we can get people in the door.
So can you still hear me? This is still Bill Humphreys.
Yes.
we have another person in the room that's interested in, what about actual farming practices as opposed to grazing practices?
So this plan cannot cover actual farming activities. Now, if you have a piece of land, and part of it you graze and part of it you have actual crops on, then we can cover the portion that you're grazing for those actions, but the actual cultivation of land we cannot.
And the same goes as well for wind farms.
Yes.
If you have wind on your property, if it's just a portion of the property, we can parcel that out. But otherwise, we can't enroll a renewable wind farm or something of that nature.
And that includes even if you have at least, even if you don't have turbines on your actual land, if it is leased to wind development, then we cannot cover that area as well.
In the
Thank you.
chat, I see Margaret put, what is the opt-out process? Will you explain that?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a formal process.
It should be very simple. I think it's detailed out in the CI and CP. I believe they just have to provide a written notification or to that effect. We haven't really had anyone opt out. Very few people opt out. But it's basically you just say, we don't want to participate anymore. Okay.
I can definitely look
Okay.
that up for you. I don't have it. I thought it was in the CI and the CP of how you remove from that, but it's not spelled out on the grazing one. It's in the parent document that I have, but I can definitely get that answer for you. If whoever's running the chat, if you can scribe down who asked that question, I can definitely reach back out to them and notify them of that answer.
So please give that information to Mexico cattle growers and we'll send it out appropriate members that ask. Walt, once notice, how long does the process take?
I guess I understand that.
Once notified that
Yeah.
they want to enroll,
Okay.
there really isn't a process. You just opt out.
Yeah, so once we receive it, then we'll notify Fish and Wildlife Service that you have opted to no longer be a participant within the program, and then it's a done deal from there.
Very good. Walter Bradley, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren, and thank you all. This is Walter Bradley with Dairy Farmers. Couple of quick questions, and maybe you just touched on it. Is your work privileged information or is it public information?
In what manner?
Well, can a member of the public ask what work have you done on Lauren's property?
So we will not provide individual enrollee information, but all of our work is published on our website, and we report on all of that back to our enrollees and to Fish and Wildlife Service. So anyone can go to our website, pull up our annual reports or our quarterly reports. They can see the work that we've done, but it's going to be in totals. It's not going to be, well, on Mr. Bradley's, we did X, Y, and Z. It'll just be, overall, we treated 1,500 acres of mesquite.
Okay, and who is the enforcer? And I'm assuming that's U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
So CAM administers the agreements, and so everyone, when they enroll, they would deal strictly with CAM. And then we do have reporting requirements that we have to report back to Fish and Wildlife Service. But really, any enrollees, they're really only dealing with CAM.
So let's say if there's a conservation measure that you're not following, you would work directly with us on this. It would come from us. If there was a violation or something like that, it would come from KIM, not from Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay, and I'll pick on Lauren. Lauren wants to build a new barn and move a fence. Can he do that, or does he have to notify somebody, or?
Yeah, so anything like that, anything that's gonna disturb ground, you would notify us about it. You would give us a footprint, what we're planning on, what you're planning on doing, where your fence is gonna run, how you're gonna build your fence, those types of actions. And then we would determine if there's a direct impact to the species. If there is, then we may need to reroute that project or shift that project around. If there's not a direct impact to it, then we'll notify you, hey, everything looks good, move forward with your project.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Brandon Smith, will you ask your question?
Thanks, Warren. My name is Brandon Smith. I've got a ranch west of Elida. And I believe it was in the red colored area on your map. What happens if I do not sign up for the for the program? Like, what is that? Does that affect it's all private land, and I've got plans to build some fence and put more water pipe in, maybe spray a little mesquite. Do I get in trouble? Do they come write me a ticket? I mean, what happens?
If there would be take of the species, then yes, there would be the potential, and Chuck, you can jump in here at any time. But yes, there is potential that your activities could result in take, in which case, if Fish was able to prove that, I don't know their process, but the agreements cover you from take of an endangered species.
So if you're not enrolled, those types of actions are subject to consultation with Fish and Wildlife Service. So you would have to get approval through Fish before you're able to implement that project in order to get your coverage for take. So it's consultation with them if you're going to do it. If you're not enrolled, if you are enrolled, then you would work with us, and that would take place under consultation. So I have to get permission to do something on my private land? It's a federally listed species now, so regardless of what surface ownership it's on, it's covered by the federal government. So yes.
Let me jump in there a little bit.
Perfect. Hop in there, Chuck.
Yeah, so the birds are protected anywhere against take. In terms of actions on private land, if there's no federal nexus involved, if there's no federal funding, if there's no federal permitting required, no federal lands, there is no consultation requirement. The consultation requirement is for federal actions. So any landowner on their private land is able to go ahead and implement those actions. What that means, though, is they are essentially assessing the risk of take. Because they can do that without consultation, doesn't mean take is allowed. You still can't take a bird as a result of that. But yeah, there's no consultation requirement if it's only a private action that doesn't involve any kind of federal resources. So no, you don't need permission to do that.
So Chuck, where does Section 10 consultation fall into that?
So we consulted on the agreement overall. So like Emily said, the take that results through the agreement is something we've already considered and we've so somebody who signs up and is implementing actions as described in the agreement has their take covered. Somebody who doesn't sign up does not have their take covered, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have to go get permission for a non-federal action.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
So let me add to that question. If I am a producer and I have an EQIP project with funds from NRCS and it's still on private land, do I have to get the federal consultation or should I be signed up?
A little bit of judgment call there. So the responsibility is on EQIP there. So EQIP does have to comply with the Endangered Species Act. So NRCS would have to, yes, they would have to do something in some form. I don't know what they would do, but they would have a requirement in some form to make sure what they are doing is not jeopardizing the species.
Okay.
Emily, in the chat, there is a question. Fastest way to determine what area of the various zones the legal descriptions of your state grass lease and private lands fall into.
If they send us an email with the legal description, we can look at the zone for them and let them know where they fall.
And we can provide those Google files too, if they would like them, to look at it themselves. Either way, we can provide that and share that.
Okay. And they also asked, where do they find the application documents that you have mentioned?
The easiest way is just to contact either myself or Emily, and we can email them to you. That way we make sure we're getting you the most up-to-date agreements.
And again,
Kelly,
we did
for-
get those cattle growers, I believe. But what we could do is send them back and to you, Michelle, maybe, and then you guys can shotgun them out to everybody.
Okay, thank you. Kelly, you have your hand raised?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to go back to Mr. Bradley's question and the discussion about the incidental take. So Kim's holding basically the permit as I can't remember his name. The Fish and Wildlife Service guy said that, the Fish and Wildlife Service has already done the Section 10 permit for Kim. So Section 10 so Kim's holding the Section 10 permit. So is there an incidental take statement with that Section 10 permit? Like, is there an amount or extent of take already identified? Because I'm wondering if each individual enrollee, the question was like, if Lauren wanted to build a new barn or build a new fence, then is he already covered by the amount or extent that's already on the permit? Or again, just how would that work?
Yes, so that is spelled out in our permit, and to be honest, I don't know what that is off the top of my head, but we did work with Fish and Wildlife Service to determine, what that number might look like based on our enrollees and to my knowledge, we've not had anything ever that we've had, to report on in terms of incidental take. And Chuck, maybe you can elaborate, but short answer is yes, that's already incorporated into our permit.
Because if Lauren wants to build his barn, any activity by a participant, it doesn't have to be no take. Some take is allowed. So how was that measured for each participant?
This is Tim Ludwig. I work for the Fish and Wildlife Service office here in New Mexico. I'm going to jump in here. The service did a conference and biological opinion for the Section 10 permit for chem, and that specifies the take that is exempted for this particular permit. I do not know off the top of my head what that is, but that opinion is publicly available for anyone to go look at and see. Chem, as the permit holder, is responsible for ensuring that take limit is not reached, and they do that essentially through their everyday actions of monitoring and working with the landowners on the ground, seeing what projects are happening, and so that is how they track that. As far as I know, the take has been very minimal from what we have done so far, particularly for landowners. Most of the take that occurs is from the mineral development side of things, where we do have land loss to development. So that is how that is done. Certainly, if there are questions, we can work to get folks the link to where that opinion is available if they want to see it in practice. But for the individual enrollee under the plan, they are not responsible for tracking any of the take. That is what CHEM is responsible for doing.
Thanks, Tim.
And you're next.
Thank you. And so I'm not a cattle grower, but we work with both with clients that have service interest as well as oil and gas interest. And I was wondering if does the agreement differ if it's an industry participant as opposed to a landowner?
Yes, yeah, so there's two separate CIs and CPs. There's one built that pertains to the ranching aspect, and there's one built, or so CNSCP built that is tailored to oil and gas development. So yeah, they're totally separate. As Emily kind of mentioned earlier, there's fees associated with those programs for the industry. And that the whole thing is to offset the take that Tim mentioned earlier. Where they're implementing their projects. So they build a well pad, they put a power line in, a pipeline. There's fees associated with that development.
Okay, but Kim is overseeing both sides.
Yes, yeah, we administer the program for both industries.
And then, and with the January 23rd enrollment, I'm guessing it's assignable. In other words, if you show up and purchase an interest in 6 months, but you didn't own it on or before January 23rd, you would only benefit under the CCAA if your predecessor had enrolled?
Correct, yeah, we would have to transfer that ownership. So just like you said, if the person you're purchasing it from had the acreage enrolled, then they could transfer that to you at that moment.
And I understood, just make sure I understood it correctly when the state land office was speaking earlier, is that they support it, but there's no umbrella protection. In other words, if you're a state lessee, it's on you to enroll, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay. All right. And the easiest way, everybody, I think we've all talked about it 1,000 times, is email y'all and you'll forward the agreements.
Yeah, and the reason that I kind of keep going that way is it allows us to track who we've had conversations with, who we've sent the paperwork to. So if we haven't heard anything back or we haven't received it, we can reach back out to you and follow up to make sure that you had everything, that you received it. And if you sent it, if it didn't get lost somewhere or something along those lines, just helps us follow up with who we communicate with.
Okay, sure. And then, sorry, one last question is that the program that Kim is administering is totally separate from whatever the earlier WAFWA.
Yes, that is a separate agreement from ours.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Margaret, I see your hands up. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Patterson. This is Marge Lantana. I'm located in Northwest New Mexico. I do hear a lot of good information that you are sharing with the producers in New Mexico. However, we are located outside that boundary. While we ever encounter that program up in Northwest area, we are in a unique area. We have multiple type of land. And we also have the Navajo reservation. My question is, will we encounter this program in the future? Thank you.
Not specific to the chicken and the lizard. That's not to say that there won't be another candidate conservation agreement that may be developed for that area for a different species, but the historical range for the chicken, as Matt had shown earlier, does not go that far northwest, so no.
Thank you so much.
Margaret Byfield, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lauren. This is a question probably most appropriately for Chuck. I just want to circle back a little bit on the federal nexus question. And if you take the scenario where you have a piece of private property that does not have any federal nexus on it currently, if they enroll in this program, does that create the federal nexus and trigger the Section 7 consultation?
I can go ahead and answer that. No, it does not. It does not pull a federal nexus into you. If you don't have any federal lands already within your enrollment or within your ranch, enrolling into the CCAA does not pull a federal tie to it.
Okay, a follow-up question is, are there any, for state lands that are in the area if there's no federal nexus on the state lands right now, then let me ask it this way. Is there any federal nexus on the state lands currently?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Clabe, please go ahead.
Thanks, Lauren. This is Clay Pearson. I'm with the Merchant Livestock Company right down here in southeast New Mexico, near Eunice and Hobbs. I've never seen 66 years old. I've never seen a prairie chicken on this place, but anyway, we're considered a habitat. My question, I guess I have two questions. Is the state land office as managers of the state trust land eligible to sign up with Kim, or do they?
They are enrolled, yes. And hey, Clay, how are you?
I'm good, Matt. Good to see you.
Yes, sir. No, they're enrolled, but their enrollment is essentially as a placeholder for future development. So if somebody was to lease that acreage, they have the ability to transfer that coverage to them, but they don't provide coverage directly, like on your place, your state sections. They have it all enrolled, but they don't cover anything of your actions. It doesn't cover your actions on those parcels.
So they're covering someone that may come in and lease after the deadline.
Yeah, that's what it's set up for.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep, exactly.
Second question I have is, if as a state grazing lessee, if you have a sublessee, which party is responsible to sign that up?
It really depends on who's going to be in control of that actual lease. So who does it fall back on to ensure you're following not only the state requirements, but if you enrolled with us, our requirements also.
Okay, yeah. Well, Matt, I'll probably be giving you a call and get a meeting with you before, here pretty soon if we can.
Okay, sounds good, Cliff. Yeah, just holler at me and we'll get together.
All right. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
So I have another question. I am here in Corona, New Mexico, and of course, there's quite a bit of wind energy things going on. Are those wind energy companies required to sign up as industry, or are they not required to sign up yet?
This program is not set up to cover wind energy. It is a direct impact to the species, so we cannot cover those actions with this plan. So essentially, if they wanted to install a wind farm, they would have to consult with Fish and Wildlife Service for that action. They wouldn't work with us at all.
Very good. Okay, Walter, I see you got your hand again.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Lauren. Two more thoughts that just entered my head from this discussion. What's the end game? How does this program terminate? What are we looking for?
I'll let you answer if you got an answer.
Well, ultimately the programs were designed to implement conservation, reduce or eliminate threats to the species, and ultimately prevent a listing. Now, there's been a tremendous amount of work on the landscape, for the species. Unfortunately, there's not a lot that we can do in terms of drought. But so the species in this case is getting listed, but ultimately continue the conservation, hopefully expand the habitat area for the chicken. And I don't know Chuck or Tim's thoughts on what that may look like down the road in terms of a listing or a delisting, but ultimately it's still to put conservation on the landscape and expand that habitat.
So it's we're going to be, I suppose, counting chickens at some point and saying, okay, we can stop this, but we don't have a clue how long that might be.
Yeah, and that determination isn't made by Kim and through this program, that determination is made on the Fish and Wildlife Service side. So if the bird was to be delisted, it would come from Fish and Wildlife Service.
Right, okay. And then do we know what kind of enforcement authority Fish and Wildlife has in the way of fines, penalties, legal action? Do we have any? I assume if we don't follow suit or we don't make this work exactly right, that they have some kind of authority to penalize.
Are you talking if you're enrolled or not enrolled with us?
Yeah, either way. I mean, I don't know what penalty authority they have.
So ultimately for Kim, if you're enrolled, the penalty for not following your conservation measures would be, we would remove you from the program. So essentially, we would no longer be provided coverages under the program through our CCAA and CCAA.
And there is a process for that. It is not just well, you didn't do this right, so you're out. There are multiple strikes per se. We call them conservation measure violations, and you have to accumulate X number of those in a year to even be considered for that. If you're enrolled. Now, Chuck and Tim, maybe you can expand on what the fines are, whatnot, if they aren't enrolled.
Okay, thank you.
Michelle, I see you have another question in the chat.
Yes, Eric wants to know if you're enrolled and someone wants an easement, how does it affect the work on the easement?
If you are not enrolled and someone wants an easement, that easement, are we talking about like a utility easement?
Eric?
So let's assume it's a road.
Yeah, so if you're not enrolled, then it's dependent upon what surface you're on, whether or not that has a consultation tied to it. So ultimately, if that's the question that would need to be answered, is there a consultation that's tied to that, and is there a risk of take with that action?
So we would need to consult you
If you're
each
enrolled,
individual easement.
Yes, yeah. If you are enrolled, then absolutely you would contact us for that activity. It's the other part, if you're not enrolled, that it's dependent on where you're at.
And the other question that is in here is if you're on a BLM allotment, do you have to enroll separately?
So there are two separate agreements. The CI, Certificate of Inclusion, covers all the non-federal acreage, and a Certificate of Participation, a CP, covers your federal acreage. So you would want to fill out and sign both the CI and a CP to cover your private states, and then your CP would cover your federal.
Thank you.
Kelly? Go ahead.
Hi again. Yeah, everyone's asking some really great questions. And Mr. Bradley, again, his question kind of got me thinking on this too. So the current agreement is a 20-year agreement, which maybe expires not the right word, but it goes through 2028. What happens in 2028 with regard to the assurances that the landowners receive now?
So that is something that is still up for discussion between CHEMM and Fish and Wildlife Service, whether we can extend the permit or if we would need to transfer it into a habitat conservation plan as opposed to a candidate conservation agreement. So the short answer there is we don't know yet, but we're going to be having those discussions here shortly.
And the whole goal is there's no gap in coverage. So we want to have something implemented and identified prior to that 28 date. So by the end of 2028, we want to make sure that we have something in place to transition, whether like Emma said, it extends the CCA out or we have a HCP developed, but we want to have that in hand in place prior to that deadline.
And can you just very quickly explain what an HCP is for the folks?
Yes, so it's a habitat conservation plan. It's along the same lines as a CCA. It's traditionally was set up as a mechanism to use after a species was listed, where the CCA is a candidate conservation agreement. It's traditionally set up or is set up to be utilized prior to a species being listed. The whole goal of that plan is to keep the species off the list. But an HCP, if there's not a CCA already in place, or even if there is one, there's an HCP that can be developed. It'll take a lot of the same conservation measures. It's a little more in depth with the measures you have to follow. A little more, I don't know if strict's the right word, but it's a little more involved of a plan versus the CCA. But it's along the same lines. It provides conservation for the species and for the habitat. And it provides you coverage of your actions.
This is Emily, everybody. I have to jump off. I have another commitment here that I have to get to, but Matt will be on for the remainder of the call. And I believe we also have Kyle Dillard. He's our project manager out of our Milnes End office. So again, thank you all for joining. Thank you to cattle growers and state land office and Fish and Wildlife Service. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Matt if you need anything. But for now, I'll leave you in Matt's hands.
Thank you very much. Bronson, you want to go ahead?
Yes, sir. I just have one quick question on the regulations that you have for part of signing up under this program of leaving 50% stubble height on your rangeland. That 50%, is it on a year-by-year basis, or do you go in at the beginning of this and take whenever you set up your test plot for seeing how much forage is grown, is that now the standard throughout your contract, or is that on a year-by-year basis? Because we all know that changes drastically.
So we monitor that every 3 years. So we look at it for that year's growth. So we'll go in prior to that year that we're gonna monitor for you. We'll go in the dormant season. We'll go zero clip that cage, come back at the end of the growing season and see what grew for that year. So what was the annual growth of that year, and then compare that to what's outside of the cage. So we don't set a standard right off the bat because we all know how much our rains and precip fluctuate. So we can't. I would never ask that of somebody like, hey, this year is how it's going to look, and you got to adhere to this the next 5 years. Like that doesn't make any sense, and that's not the spirit of the program and how it's set up. So no, we will look at it for that year and get that snapshot of that year and use that information for that year.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet.
Pat Woods, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lauren. This is Pat Woods. And I've got a Senate district here that runs pretty good ways into this chicken country. And the question I have, we've got a Ute pipeline that is being built north out of Clovis, going to the lake at Logan. So there's some of these easements that have been signed. There's some of the easements that are being contested. This pipeline has eminent domain. So what happens if a landowner signs up with you guys and then turns around and gets a pipeline right away condemned on them, or they've already signed that easement? does that, all of that liability did shift to the pipeline, shift to the utility? Is that how that works?
So if you're enrolled, you're only responsible for your actions. So they're not installing that pipeline, and especially if it's eminent domain, they don't really have a say on anything about it anyway. So it really ties back to what they have control of and what they have a say of. So if they don't have any control of that pipeline going in on their place, then they're not responsible for that action. Or if there was take, if it caused take, then they're not responsible for that take.
Well, but what if they voluntarily signed, but it's just because they didn't want to go through a lawsuit, it still shifts to the utility, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing in the program that says you can't lease your lands to a pipeline running through it. So I don't, Tim and Chuck, if you want to chime in, but I feel like it's not. There can't be. I don't see where there would be take. I don't see where the landowner would be responsible for that take, because they're still not, even though they allow that lease to go through, they're allowed that pipeline to go through, they're not conducting that construction.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I would add to that, if they do, after they're enrolled and something like this did come up, it would be probably in their best interest if they are allowing that to go across their easement or whatever it looks like on their private stuff, to consult with us and make sure there's not going to be any direct take of the species. Make sure we're not going right through a lek or something like that with a project of that manner.
We're going to take a couple more questions, but please go ahead, Clay. We're running out of time.
Yeah, Lauren, this won't take just a second. Matt, I'm reading from the letter we received from the State Land Office. A participant CI describes the activities that will be covered and the specific conservation measures that the participant agrees to implement to benefit the lesser prairie chicken and the desert sagebrush lizard. My question is, are those activities and specific conservation measures written in stone in the agreement or in the sign-up contract, or are they subject to a change?
Yeah, no, they're written right into this the CI and the CP, so it's all spelled out right there for you in that document. When we send that to you, everything in that that list of conservation measures is what you agree to, and as long as you're following those and everything's good, then nothing above and beyond that, those measures will be asked of you. But yeah, it's all spelled out in that agreement that you sign.
Yeah, well, I was just wondering if, if somewhere within the 20 years, here comes something that you couldn't live with, that you were forced into. So, yeah, sounds good. Thanks,
Okay.
Matt.
You bet.
Tom, please go ahead and ask your question.
My question has to do with the 50% use you talked about. So this is based on height or weight?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Kyle, are you on where you can?
Josh here. Josh is our range con and he'll answer your question. Yeah, so it's not based on stubble height. It's 50% of that forage production by weight for that year, not stubble height.
Okay, so that makes a huge difference here.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to go back to the blue and yellow on your map, or the blue and orange on your map, the 10-mile buffer zone. So what are the conservation management or conservation measure differences between the 10-mile buffer and this orange area?
There nothing changes. The conservation measures are straight across the board throughout the entire range of the habitat, except for one nuance. This area here that I'm showing in red is timing zone area. So if you're doing like construction or anything like that, and this really is more tied to oil and gas development. Not so much on the ranching side. You're able to do your day-to-day activities, but if somebody was doing a construction type activity, then from times of March 1 to June 15, from 3 a.m. to 9 a.m., you wouldn't be able to conduct that type of work. That's the only thing that's kind of different, but for the ranching sector, this does not apply. The timing zones don't apply to the ranching sector. It only applies to the oil and gas sector. So for you, Tom, this is just still on the ranching side. The conservation measures are the exact same across the board. If you're inside of that purple outline, then it doesn't matter if you're in Tucumcari or if you're south of Hobbs, the conservation measures are the same.
Okay, and then I want to talk to you about the cages you talked about putting out. And anybody that's been involved with our Forest Service or BLM lands where they've put out cages and those cages stay there year after year after year, your productivity decreases in those cages because as your grass becomes so overgrown and senescent, then your current year growth is very little. And if you're going to put out cages, you need to move them because that's going to be misleading information when those cages are out there in the same spot year after
We
year
move
after
them.
year.
We move them every 3 years.
Okay.
So each time we come back, it's moved.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions I've got. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Michelle, you said you had a question. This will be the final question in the chat.
Mr. Bloom asked, just so that we're all on the same page, what constitutes a take? Can it include change to critical habitat such as converting grassland to farming or tearing it up for construction for pipelines? Can a new fence constitute a take if it provides a raptor roost?
So I'll kind of take these as we go. Take is defined as harm, harass, pursue. So read into that how you want. It's a pretty vague definition if you ask me. Even if you were to flush prairie chickens, that could potentially be taken, looked at it as take. So it's a pretty vague definition within the definition of that word. So as far as converting grassland to farming, that's one of your concepts.
Quite a bit of this information. And try to keep you informed as we go forward.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank y'all.